Well, it looks like the rules for the Archaeopter have got out into the world of the internet, so let's take a look at what we've got. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy-focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. Well, we know that the rules for the Archaeopter will be contained in Engine War, which hopefully we should have details of really soon. In the meantime, let's focus on this guy's datasheet and take a look at what it might mean for the Adeptus Mechanicus. I believe that we've got all three datasheets plus points costs. The points costs are written in French because of course they are, but I reckon it's obvious enough to be able to interpret. I'm quite excited to see what this Da Vinci-esque flyer has got to offer us, so let's jump straight into its rules. So as we all know, the Archaeopter comes in three different variants: the Transvector, the transport variant, the Stratoraptor, the fighter style variant, and the Fusilave, the bomber. It seems that the Transvector is an incredibly cheap flyer indeed, and it clocks in at 100 points if it doesn't have the chaff launcher, but if you give it the chaff launcher, that will increase to 120. It's got a typical flyer movement of 20 to 50 inches, weapon skill 5+, ballistic skill 3+, strength 6, toughness 7, 10 wounds, 3 attacks, leadership 9 and a 3+ save. Point for point, that's seeming really quite durable, particularly so if you give it the chaff launcher for the extra 20. Of course 12 heavy stubber shots aren't ever going to absolutely change the world, but they can most certainly chip into anti-infantry duties. As previewed in the Warhammer community preview, it can either choose between a command uplink or a chaff launcher. Now we know the chaff launcher will cost 20 points more than the command uplink, and that does make sense because it is just better. That command uplink, as previewed, allows friendly Forge World units to use its leadership instead of their own when they're within 6 inches, where the chaff launcher is essentially an ironstone all the time, -1 damage for attacks made against the vehicle. It gets access to Canticles of the Omnissiah, as you'd hopefully expect, and it is also as manoeuvrable as an Eldar flyer as well, having the Manoeuvrable Craft special rule, which means that it can pivot 90 degrees both at the start and the end of its movement phase. That will be pretty helpful for not flying off the board. In addition to that, it does have a hover mode as well. It has the Hoverjet special rule, in which it can trade out its standard airborne and hard to hit special rules, and just becomes a standard vehicle with fly and movement of 20 inches. Honestly, this thing is looking about to be the most manoeuvrable flyer that you can possibly get in the game. I'm not sure if anything else has the manoeuvrable Eldar style shenanigans, such as Manoeuvrable Craft, while also being able to have a Hoverjet special rule as well if you want to drop out of flyer mode and maybe even charge some things in close combat. Now for the main bit of bad news for the flyer, which is its transport capacity. I was honestly hoping that this might be 12 or at the very least 10, but I'm afraid it's only 6 infantry. They can be either Secutarii, the Forge World ones, Electro Priests, Tech Priests, or Scutarii infantry, and it can't transport Belisarius Core. That is really quite disappointing. I was quite hoping that we'd be able to deliver large units of Electro Priests to the enemy with this. It looks like if you want 10 of them in a transport, then the Scorpius is still the way to go. Despite this sadly slightly lacking transport capacity, I do think that it could still definitely be worth an include in the army. If you take that chaff launcher, then I'd argue that this thing could be one of the toughest flyers in the entire game right now, point for point. So you very much could just trundle the units straight up to the enemy, have them jump out and engage the foe the following turn. At the moment, at least in 8th edition, you could even stack that -1 to hit with the Stygies Forge World to get you yet another -1 to hit, so it's both -2 to hit, toughness 7 and -1 damage. That thing will not go anywhere. Let's move on to the next variant then, which is the Strato Raptor. This thing's armed with 2 Cognis heavy stubbers, 2 heavy phosphor blasters, and a twin Cognis las cannon. And it also has a command uplink that it can swap out for a chaff launcher for 20 points. At base it'll cost you 144 points for the loadout without the chaff launcher, going up to 164 if you buy that one in. Otherwise it is literally identical to the Transvector except without the transport capacity. Same 10 wounds, same damage table, same hoverjet, same manoeuvrable craft rule, and rather unfortunately no special rules to increase its ballistic skill or accuracy against enemy units. Now we haven't seen the full rules for Engine War yet, so for all I know that any of these 3 might actually get their own unique stratagems to help them do better at their job. We're going to have to wait and see for that, but at the moment it just seems to be a plane that if it is swooping around all over the place, it will be hitting on 4s with those heavy phosphor blasters and twin las cannon and twin heavy stubbers. I kind of wonder if this thing might just about be worth it, say if it was just hovering around, maybe next to Belisarius Core or something. It puts out a reasonable amount of firepower with those twin las cannons, heavy phosphor blasters and stubbers, while really quite tough to enemy shooting if you are buying it the chaff launcher. And then of course it has its excellent mobility, which it can shoot off if it needs to go and achieve a certain mission throughout the game, maybe jumping in to snipe a character or something. So overall an interesting plane, looks very tough to take out with that chaff launcher, but maybe not quite as much raw firepower as some of the other equivalent points cost Adeptus Mechanicus units get. Moving on to the final of the three, the Fusillade Bomber. As best I can tell, this thing is very cheap indeed. It's got a very similar stat line to the Transvector, and again it's armed with 4 Cognis heavy stubbers, and no other ranged weapons aside from its heavy bombs. This puts the Fusilave at 110 points, so it's a really cheap flyer, and that'll go up to 130 if you do buy it a chaff launcher. Now this thing might honestly be one of the first functional bombers that I've seen in all of Warhammer 40k. That bomb rack works in much the same way as many other bombs do, and unlike some of the rest of them, it isn't just limited to once or twice a game. It can just keep on doing this turn on turn. It's got the fairly standard bomb rule, where you nominate one unit that the Fusilave has moved over, and for each model in that unit, you roll a dice, and on a 4+, it suffers a mortal wound. If the unit has any vehicles in it, then each vehicle you roll 3d6 for, up to a maximum of 10. So typically 1 or 2 mortal wounds on each vehicle or tank, but around about an average of 5 mortal wounds on any infantry formation that's got 10 models or more. I think the extra mobility and the ability to go into hover mode will both really help this thing. I'm not sure if we've actually got any hover mode bombers yet in 40k, but there's no reason that this thing can't drop a bomb after jumping over an enemy unit while in 20-inch move hover mode. That means the bomber can merrily hop to and from over enemy units, hopefully dishing out 5 mortal wounds each turn if you can find enough hordes, or while continuing to blaze away with those heavy stubbers. Again, even with that mortal wound output, I'm not sure that the damage output of this one is actually all that amazing, but just point for point it is going to be really annoying to remove, with -1 to hit at least most of the time, and that chaff launcher soaking up a lot of incidental damage, being really quite good protection against anything that's damage 2 or damage D3. I think I can just about see a role for each of these in game, and I feel that they balance them really quite well. The Transvector I think is going to be the most niche, delivering a very elite squad into the heart of enemy lines, as basically compared with the Fusilave you're only saving 10 points by taking the transport capacity over those bombs, and if you aren't making good use of that transport capacity, then you may as well have just taken the Fusilave. I think I could see taking 1 or 2 of the Fusilaves in an army to have a credible bomber threat that's really quite durable with that chaff launcher and really hard to remove. Mortal wounds are a really handy tool to have in the army. It's not going to be particularly efficient against anything that's a vehicle, unless of course you can fly over a whole squadron of the things, but if it does manage to kill on average 5 troopers a turn for several turns in a row, this thing could really put a dent in hordes, particularly combined with those heavy stubbers. The Stratoraptor finally, I feel might see a bit of a niche in comparison with things like the Honor Jejune Crawler or the Scorpius Disintegrators. I feel like point for point it does have less firepower than them, but with that chaff launcher I think it has similar amount of durability point for point. Maybe we'll have to math hammer it at some point. I think the advantage of the Stratoraptor though, while it can sit around in a gunline castle for a bit of the game, it could potentially go zooming off anywhere on the board with that massive 50-inch movement, and suddenly be taking out troops in the back line, or maybe jumping over right next to a character to try and assassinate them with those las cannons should it want to. I feel that for the Fusilave and the Stratoraptor, I would certainly be very tempted to take the chaff launcher, as they both pack enough of a punch for the opponent to try and take them out, whereas the Transvector I'm not sure you necessarily need it. You run the risk of it just being ignored if it's very tough and doesn't really do much on the battlefield after it's delivered its cargo. I'm not saying don't take it on the Transvector, but I feel like it's probably more of a choice. In terms of the Forge World Dogmas, I feel that the Styges 8 one is going to be far more useful than some of the others. Just getting a -1 to hit on top of the -1 to hit that they're already going to have from hard to hit is just far too big of an advantage to ignore, at least until 9th comes along. Otherwise Mars might get a bit of a look in. I could certainly see some Stratoraptors hanging out near core for a few turns, before then diving in towards the enemy. Of course the Admech have loads of synergy with healing up vehicles, so any nearby tech priests can help fix them up double quick, and that could be particularly painful for your opponent when you're already taking -1 damage from those excellent chaff launchers. In terms of stratagems, I can see them being used a lot more on the Stratoraptor than the other two, to be honest. Rage of the Machines can allow you to move and ignore the penalty for shooting heavy weapons, and I think that's going to be far more valid on the Stratoraptor compared with the other two who only have their stubbers. You might also be able to operate on full profile if it's heavily injured, or with Machine Spirit Resurgence, and of course we saw the preview stratagem from Engine War earlier in the week, which could potentially allow one of these planes to turn an enemy character's auras off, or at least make them reposition in a way that's away from the rest of their army. I have a feeling that that could have some good synergy with either the Transvector or the Fusilave, which you're not going to be too adverse to throwing straight towards enemy lines. So let me know what you think of these planes down in the comments below. I'll most certainly be covering more on the channel as we have more details from Engine War. In general, I'm pretty pleased with the rules. I think that they hold up decently, although I must admit the flyers are quite cheap in points cost for just how much it costs in price. It's not going to be one of those ones that has a very good points per pound ratio, unfortunately, much like the Space Marine Impulsor. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. We'll be doing quite a bit of reviews for the new Adeptus Mechanicus over the coming week, so stay tuned if you'd like to see more. If you'd like to support the channel, I'd just like to mention the channel's Patreon page, which does allow me to dedicate all this time to making YouTube videos about model soldiers. If you are enjoying regularly, then any support is greatly appreciated. The link is down in the description below. As well as helping create new content, Patrons get to see at least one video per week early, get to vote on the future videos coming out for the channel, and there's also regular prize draws where I post out new miniatures to lucky Patrons once a month. So if any of that sounds good, or you'd just like to help support the channel, the link is in the video description below. A big thank you to my current Patrons who allow me to make this channel happen. In any case, a big thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.